Starwalker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, a podcast all about tabletop role-playing games from the perspective of the captain's chair. Greetings, gamer, and welcome to the Obsidian Monolith, a podcast in which I will build a Numenera campaign from scratch. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. Today, I'll discuss the fourth adventure of the campaign, The Machine of the Emols. So grab a pen, grab some paper, and get your creative juices going. It's time to create an adventure. Hello, listener. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the 9th of the Obsidian Monolith episodes and episode 19 of Game Master's Journey. So first of all, I want to thank all my listeners for their support. I really appreciate it. I want to send a thank you out to all the GM Intrusions fans who've moved on over to this show. And I want to send a thank you and a big welcome to all my new listeners. I keep forgetting to announce this, so I thought I would announce it now. I have gotten a new media host for the audio files for Game Master's Journey, which means I've also gotten a new web player on the website. So for you, the listener, you're going to notice a lot faster downloads. The file should download super fast now, depending on your internet connection. And if you listen to the show on the website at starwalkerstudios.com, I know in the past some of you have had issues with the web player, especially on Chrome. And some of you have had buffering issues where you're listening to the show and all of a sudden you have to wait for it to buffer. The new player works a lot better and there's no buffering. The thing, well, I have a pretty fast internet connection, but the thing downloads the whole episode to the player in like a few seconds on my connection. So that's awesome. So I hope you guys enjoy that. I'm super excited about it. And the nice thing about it for me is I'm getting much better statistics and numbers to see how the show is doing. And I'm really excited with how well the show is doing. It looks like I've got a lot of people who've come over from GM Intrusions, and I have a lot of people that are new to the show, which is awesome. So this is number 9 in the series of Obsidian Monolith episodes, which if you're new to the show, these are a series of episodes where I'm creating a campaign for the game Numenera. And I'm using this as basically a teaching exercise for those of you that are new GMs who have not created your own campaign before, to kind of show you how I create a campaign from beginning to end. Because months ago when I started this, I was seeing a lot of questions online, especially in the Numenera community, about, how do I create a campaign? How do I create an adventure? How do I connect adventures together? How do I get the PCs from adventure A to adventure B and things like that? And so the idea for these episodes was born, and I thought the best way to try to explain to someone at least how I do that is to give you an example. So that's what these have been, and today I'm talking about the 4th episode in the campaign. And so by the end of this episode, I have shown you kind of how I generate my ideas at the beginning, how I figure out kind of where I want the campaign to go, how I start creating adventures, and how I connect them together and work with the fact that you never know what the PCs are going to do, and how can you even plan ahead when you don't know what the PCs are going to do. And I think that I've illustrated all of that pretty well. I don't know that there's much to be gained for me to continue doing these about every adventure of the campaign. We'll see how this goes, but hopefully the next Obsidian Monolith, number 10, I will be wrapping up this series, and I'll kind of tell you how I end the campaign and how I kind of draw everything to a close, and that'll be it. And that will be good timing because this is episode 19 of Game Master's Journey. We're almost at the end of season 1. And in season 2, I want to start a series of supplemental episodes that are all about world building. So I want to get this done before season 2. So another thing I've started doing is I have started releasing all of the information I have in written form on my blog at starwalkerstudios.com/blog, and I'm linking to those in the Obsidian Monolith episodes. So if you go to the show notes for this episode, I will link to the blog post that is relevant to this. So if you're wanting to run this campaign yourself, you can go check out the blog, and I have more kind of nitty-gritty information beyond what I talk about on the show to help you out, so you can kind of use my ideas to build your own campaign. And before I get into this, real quickly, I would like to ask a favor of you, my listener, that if you enjoy Game Master's Journey, that you head on over to iTunes and give me a review. I've been getting some great reviews lately, and I appreciate good reviews for the show. And I will have a link directly to the page on iTunes, so you don't have to go find it in iTunes. You can just click that link. It will take you there, and you can leave a review, and I would really appreciate that. So the 4th adventure is called The Machine of the Emols, and I am going to go into this adventure in a little bit of detail just because this is kind of the culmination of the themes and ideas I had for the beginning chunk of the campaign, which was this conflict between the Kalovas and the Emols and getting the players involved with that. And so this adventure finally sees that coming to a head. So one thing that I've been doing a lot more lately and trying to do more of is really good descriptions in my game. And actually in next week's episode of Game Master's Journey, episode 20, I'm going to be talking a bit about using good descriptions in your game as a game master. And one thing that annoys me to no end is when I spend good money for a published adventure and there aren't descriptions, or there aren't enough descriptions. So when I was, originally coming up with this, for me running it, I wanted to have good descriptions for things. And for me personally, it really helps to write out a description ahead of time for anything important in the game session coming up, whether it's a scene or a character or whatever, because I found if I don't write the description out, I will tend to forget to even do the description, where if I have it written out in front of me, then I tend to remember to actually give that to the players. So here is a description I came up with for the opening scene for this adventure. It is a hot summer day in Bone Spur with the type of humidity you can almost reach out and touch with your hands. A visible misty haze hangs in the air, somehow resisting being burned away by the blazing sun. It has been 2 weeks since the festival and the unfortunate incident with the monstrous tick-like creature. Life has returned to normal, or what passes for it, in this strange little town where people reek of garlic, onions, and other unnamed yet potent spices. You found a bit of shade beneath one of the towering fossilized ribs of some unknown ancient beast. For the only thing worse than the hot, heavy air outside is the stifling heat indoors. You fan your sweaty face and neck in a vain attempt at relief, wishing nature would send a real breeze through the town. You try not to notice the smell of your companions, like you, sweating in the heat. Perhaps you'd all benefit from a bath, a cold bath, or at least a swim in the Fellwood. You hear Kerdrick talking to a Galen he's trying to break to saddle at the nearby Logger's Rest stable. You find your gaze drawn to the westwood in the distance, wondering if in the shade beneath the trees the heat might be more tolerable. A patch of thick smoke rising above the treetops catches your eye, a black smudge on the horizon. Could it be a forest fire or something even worse? Whatever it is, it's too close to Bone Spur for comfort, perhaps a day's walk away. A few Bone Spurns like you, seeking respite in the shade beneath the bones, have noticed the smoke as well. They murmur among themselves, their faces betraying alarm. So that's kind of the setup, and at this point, I open it up to the PCs to tell me what they want to do. If they don't immediately decide to investigate what's going on with the smoke, they are summoned to see the mayor of the town, and she informs them that a merchant entered town the other day claiming that the smoke is from the Black Smoker, the machine of the Emols. He also told her of their bounty on Kalova heads. So the mayor is concerned about this for numerous reasons. She asked the PCs to investigate the strange machine in the Westwood for her. She tasked them with getting the Emols to agree to honor Bonespur's claims on the area and their new peace with the Kalovas. So again, just a little bit of background here. The Black Smoker is a massive logging machine, and the Emols are a noble family of Navarine who are using this machine to log huge sections of the Westwood. The people of Bonespur have achieved a tenuous peace with the Kalovas who live in the Westwood, and the Kalovas are a sentient spider-like race. And depending how things have gone thus far in the campaign, the PCs may have even kind of improved those relations a bit, but they could be easily messed with by people on either side doing things that they shouldn't be. Now, these Emol people have a bounty on Kalova heads and are paying money to anyone that brings them a head of one of these Kalovas. And so this spells trouble for the Bonespurns and the nearby Kalovas that these people are moving into the area. So assuming that the PCs either go on their own to check this out or agree to go when asked by the mayor, I next have a description of the canal which they will travel down to get to the Westwood. The warm, stagnant water of the Heart's Blood Canal doesn't provide much relief from the heat as you slip in and grab hold of a Numenera tug. The tug pulls you at a good pace down the canal. The strange metal sides and bottoms of the canal give the water a silvery look. Mosquitoes and other insects swarm around, but they keep their distance from you thanks to Madame Sadel's wondrous soup. And then once they get to the Westwood, I have a description for that. The trees of the Westwood tower above you. As you'd hope, it is somewhat cooler within their shade, but the air is still and thick. A breeze would do wonders. The air is filled with the smell of pine, drit, and wildflowers, and the buzzing and whirring of insects creates a constant background that rises and falls and changes in timbre, but never ceases. The great redwoods tower overhead, many of their trunks more than large enough to be turned into a Kalova dwelling without harming the tree. Among them grow smaller trees, though anywhere else one would remark on their size, but the redwoods dwarf them. Thanks to the thick canopy overhead and the seasonal burnings by the Kalovas, the forest floor is free of undergrowth. The ground is carpeted with pine needles and rust and earth-colored leaves that fell last autumn and are slowly becoming one with the earth. The small amounts of dappled sunlight that penetrate the canopy make the forest seem a constant twilight of greenish yellow light. So obviously the Kalovas have not done their burning yet this year, because if they did, there wouldn't be leaves left over from last autumn, right? So next I have some information about traveling through the Westwood. It's going to take about a day of travel from the logging camp through or along the Westwood to get to the machine. And the GM can, during this time, have the PCs encounter some danger if she wishes, or you could have the travel go without incident. If the GM wishes to add an encounter, you can choose something from either the woods or jungle or plains or desert tables in the Ninth World Bestiary, which are kind of your encounter tables, depending on if the PCs are going through the Westwood or along its outer edge. And some possible beings that they could encounter are maybe Palones or Murden. So next, the Black Smoker. The machine is decorated with Kalova heads, which of course the Kalovas aren't going to like. So the PCs can handle this situation with the Black Smoker in a number of different ways. They could attack the Emols and try to either disable or destroy the machine itself. They could try to talk with the Emols and convince them not to log in the area and to stop hunting Kalovas and paying bounties for their heads. Or they could try to be sneaky and disable or destroy the machine without conflict. Or they could come up with something entirely different. Captain Horick is the officer in charge of the soldiers guarding the machine, and he will defend the machine to his death, and he won't make any deals. He follows orders, and until he gets new orders from Charina Emol, he does as he was instructed. He defends the machine and makes sure it keeps logging. As long as he's alive, the soldiers fight to the death as well. So Horik and the soldiers will do their best to disable or kill the PCs if it comes to a fight. If the PCs flee, Horik will send a few soldiers in pursuit if he thinks they have a good chance of catching the PCs, but he will not leave the Black Smoker with less than 6 soldiers guarding it. If a fight does break out, the foremen, the mechanics, and technicians will not seek out combat. However, they will defend themselves if attacked. If the GM wishes, the foreman and or the mechanics may attack the PCs if they try to damage the machine. They've worked really hard to keep the thing running, after all, but they won't do so if it seems likely they'll be killed or seriously hurt. There are also 2 nanos around the machine, and they will attack the PCs using Numenera devices and esoteries if battle breaks out. And as long as the captain is alive, they will fight to the death as well. Now, if the captain is killed, the PCs may be able to get the rest of the soldiers to surrender. And of course, this would require a roll. If the soldiers do surrender, or if the captain and all the soldiers are killed, then the others will no longer fight and will surrender, and this includes the nanos. So regarding trying to talk the way past this situation, Nathaniel Durr is the foreman, and he's a reasonable man, and he could be convinced to allow the PCs to sabotage the machine. Sharina Emol knows that the thing is always breaking down, and he's hopeful he could avoid suspicion. However, this isn't really a possibility as long as Captain Horik is in the picture. Durr fears Horik and knows that he has undying loyalty to Sharina Emol. It's a similar situation for the nanos. As long as Horik and the soldiers are around, they will fight. However, if Horik is removed from the situation, they no longer care. They're just in it for the money. As long as they can be convinced that Sharina Emol won't learn that they stopped fighting, they won't stand in the PC's way. The mechanics and the technicians just do what they're told by Captain Horik and the foreman. So the soldiers are going to be a little bit more difficult to deal with. Even if Horik is eliminated, they may be loyal to the Emols, and or they may fear the consequences if they let the PCs destroy or damage the machine. Now, the GM should roleplay the soldiers as she sees fit. If they're frightened enough of the PCs, especially if most of them have been killed, they may agree to their terms. A lot depends on how convincing the PCs are and what kind of deal they want to make. So then, of course, I came up with all these characters. I've got the foreman, Nathaniel Durr, and he's the guy that decides where the machine will go to log next. He's the guy in charge. We've got 4 mechanics/operators. They operate the machine. We've got 4 technicians that repair the machine when it breaks down, which is all the time. And then our officer is Captain Horik, who leads the soldiers. We have 2 nanos, Nico Weir, and the other nano I didn't come up with a name for because I didn't think it likely that I would need both of them to have names, and I didn't. And then we have 12 soldiers. That's kind of it as far as what I've got set up for this. Again, I have a situation set up. I've anticipated some of the general ways things could go, namely the PCs could try to talk their way through this situation. The PCs could resort to combat, or the talking may end up in combat, or the PCs may try some kind of stealthy way of disabling the machine. And then I've kind of set up what I need to deal with all of those options. And really anything else the PCs come up with are likely going to be some kind of iteration of one of those 3 things anyway. So obviously I need some NPCs and some personalities in case the PCs do want to interact with them and try to talk their way through it, which unless you just have totally bloodthirsty PCs, I think that that's what they'll at least try. Because, the mayor didn't say go out and kill these guys. She said go and try to get them to agree to our terms with the Kalovas and try to get them to leave this area. Hopefully you have smart players and, there's a lot less risk to their characters if this can be settled peacefully. So in order to be able to do that, we need some characters. We need to know what these characters' motivations are. So we have the foreman who he's doing a job. He was hired to do this. He's concerned about his future employment opportunities if he doesn't do what he's supposed to in this job. He's concerned about repercussions from the noblewoman, Trina Emol, if he does something she doesn't like. But in the end, he's not going to die for this, right? He can always go somewhere else and find work, even if he's ruined in Navarine. The officer, the captain of the soldiers, on the other hand, he's a soldier. And Trina Emol is his liege lord, and he will die in her service. So, we kind of have this situation where we have some of the NPCs who would negotiate with the PCs. We have a bunch of NPCs in the technicians that don't care and just do what they're told. And then we have the officer and the soldiers, and the officer is basically not going to be convinced. When I ran it, it came down to combat. They tried to negotiate, and the captain was unyielding. So combat broke out, and they killed the captain, and they killed a few of the soldiers, and then they were able to get the rest of the soldiers to stand down, and then they made a deal with the foreman that involved them basically destroying the machine. And they got a bunch of ciphers from it, which is a great way to destroy technology in Numenera, is get ciphers from it. That is Adventure 4, and that's kind of how it can go. And hopefully this kind of shows you how you can kind of set up a situation and you can be prepared for whatever the PCs are going to do, but you don't need to be like, well, this is what they're going to do, right? You leave it up to the PCs how they want to handle it, but you're ready for whatever they try to do. So if they would have just decided to attack and fight, I had all the information I needed for combat. Having these NPCs fleshed out is very useful because it could inform decisions in combat as far as, do they surrender or not? Do they flee or not? Things like that. How hard do they fight? Do they fight to the death? Things like that. And if the PCs would have decided to be sneaky, again, I had everything I needed because I knew the basic stats of all the NPCs. So I would have known how easy or difficult it would be for, the PCs to do that. And, what I like to do is, because as a game master, we have an idea of a story we want to tell, right? And you want the players to have freedom of choice, but that doesn't mean that you need to let the players run all over you. And it doesn't mean that you need to let the players run all over your story. And it doesn't mean that you as a GM can't steer things the way that you want them to go without taking that choice away from the players. So what I like to do, and I've given you at least 2 examples of this now in this series, is I like to set up a situation where, yes, there are many different ways this could be handled, but some of those are going to be more effective than others. So for instance, in the adventure, The Windmill in the Woods, what I kind of hoped would happen is that the PCs would explore and investigate the windmill, kind of figure it out as much as they could, and find a way to solve the problem of the windmill and resolve the situation that way. But they could have gone in and just tried to destroy the thing, right? Now, I had NPCs warn them against that and warn them of the possible consequences of that. And the way I set it up mechanically is, if they would have gone that route, it would have actually been more difficult to do. There was a lower chance of success. Basically, the rolls involved in trying to destroy the windmill were much harder than the rolls involved in trying to figure it out. And even if they would have succeeded, the consequences would have been very bad and could have actually resulted in one or all of the characters dying, because the thing would have exploded or imploded, basically. So that's how I like to handle it. So in this instance, with the Machine of the Emols, again, I don't care what the players do. However, the whole kind of theme of this series of adventures has been about diplomacy, right? And kind of created in the hopes that the players would decide to kind of be a diplomatic liaison between the humans of Bonespur and the Kalovas of the Westwood, and try to improve the situation for everybody. So them going to the Emols and trying to negotiate with them is within that theme and fits, and it is the ideal solution because the players don't know that it's not necessarily possible or likely that they're going to be successful. But if they could be, then, that would be the best for everybody, right? So I set it up in such a way that, if they tried to parlay, chances are good that they could at least get the foreman on their side so that, when it came to a fight, once they took out the captain and maybe a few of the soldiers, the rest would kind of do what the PCs wanted and they didn't have to fight everybody. If they would have just charged in guns a-blazing, it would have been a very difficult encounter because they would have been fighting everyone, all these NPCs, instead of like the way it worked out with my group. They ended up basically only having to deal with the officer and the soldiers. The other NPCs kind of stayed out of it. And once they took out the officer, the other soldiers stood down. And of course there was a role, like basically like an intimidation role or whatever involved with that. But that was a much easier way to handle it than if they would have just charged in and attacked. Another possibility that I think would work really well is the stealth option. If they would have waited till nightfall and tried to sneak in and sabotage the machine, that would have been easier than a frontal assault. But the problem with that, and the reason why that's not the best solution, is because it's not a permanent solution. And unless they figured out a way to permanently dismantle this machine where it couldn't be repaired anymore. I mean, remember, they got a whole team of technicians working on this thing all the time and a couple nanos. So it's unlikely that they could damage it to the point where it could not be eventually repaired. So they haven't really solved the problem. They've just kind of put it off. Where with the kind of more diplomatic option, they get the NPCs that are left to basically kind of walk away from the situation. And so not only is this machine dismantled in the woods, but the NPCs on the scene aren't going to try to repair it. So hopefully that's a good example to you of kind of how you can set things up and how you can look at the possible solutions to the situation and decide which one or ones you think are the best solutions, and then make the mechanics match that. So those solutions are maybe a little easier, or the outcome is better, the consequences aren't as bad. And then solutions that aren't very good solutions, make them more difficult or make them more costly to the PCs if that's the way they go. And I'm usually a big fan of making the just charge in and kill everything not the best solution. And if that's the way the players go, then it's either going to be really difficult, or it's going to be very costly, or the results aren't going to be nearly as favorable as if they would have thought about things a little bit more. Because I like to reward players who roleplay, and I like to reward players that think, as opposed to just hack and slash everything in sight. So that's the fourth adventure, and I think at this point I've given you enough illustrations of kind of how to create adventures and how to connect them together. So I think that the next really big thing to talk about as far as a campaign is how do you end a campaign. So that's what I'll talk about in episode 10 of the Obsidian Monolith. So just to let you know kind of how the rest of the campaign goes, at least the way I did it, is once they have resolved the situation with the Emols and the Black Smoker, the PCs then went to Charmand. And I talked about in a previous episode how they had this teleportation cipher that the Eon Priest in town was able to rig so it could teleport the whole group. And they were going to Charmand to investigate Sir Arthur. And at this point in the campaign, I really started more kind of customizing it to the characters I had in my campaign, because, whether you're running your own campaign or one that someone else wrote, you always want to tailor things to your particular player characters as much as you can. So, that's a problem with published campaigns, is the further you get into the campaign, the more it should be kind of going off in its own direction based on your personal group, and the less helpful the published stuff is, unless you're going to really try to railroad your players, which I try to avoid. So I had come up with, one of my players had come up with as part of his background that he had been a member of the Order of the Truth long ago, and he had been charged with protecting a high-ranking priest. And during the night, while they were out in the field, the priest disappeared. No one heard from him again. And so at that point, the PC felt like he'd failed, and he kind of went off in a self-imposed exile. And so I wanted to do something with that, and we decided as a group that this Eon Priest was actually Sir Arthur. So I had established while they were still in Bone Spur, as I was, nearing the point of wanting to get them out of Bone Spur because I wanted to get them elsewhere in the world, I let that character know that, Sir Arthur is back on the scene. People have seen him in Charmand. And so the player was very interested in going and confronting him because he'd always assumed that he was dead, and to find out that, he was alive, he wanted to know, where have you been for the last 20 years? And why did you let me go through all this kind of heartache about failing my duty to you? So that got him to Charmand. And I used a teleportation thing because I didn't really want to spend a bunch of time with traveling to Charmand because that's not really where the story was. Once they got to Charmand, I gave the hook for the next big adventure, which was an adventure in which I used the Dream Sallow monster from the Ninth World Bestiary, which is a tree-like creature that causes everyone around it to fall asleep, and then it burrows roots into their skulls and it feeds on their bodies. Meanwhile, their minds are put into basically like a virtual reality that's created by the tree, and they're there for as long as the tree lives, potentially forever. So I had come up with this whole town based on the idea of the Dream Sallow, and the town was called Delirium. And so the basic idea was that generations ago, the townspeople made an agreement with the spirit of this Dream Sallow, because when you're in its virtual reality, it appears as a tree-like woman. So it's a sentient being. And, instead of having this tree constantly luring people from the village in so that it could, feed on them, the ancestors of the people in the village today worked out a deal with the tree where when one of their citizens reached the age of 60, they would voluntarily go to the tree and basically die. And the elders of the village spun this to their people as part of their religion, and they worshiped the tree, and they weren't going to just die, but they were going to enjoy this, eternal afterlife, which there was some truth to it because their minds went into this virtual reality that the tree creates. And, the virtual reality is it's whatever you want it to be. So it's, a very enjoyable place for most people to be. So this is how things work. People would get to age 60, they would go to the tree, and the tree would take them there and feed on their bodies. And then in return, the tree no longer lured people to it. So the idea was that Sir Arthur went to this town, presumably to study the tree or study the strange town out in the beyond that had some weird Numenera and stuff going on. But the real reason he went is because he basically went to die. It was almost like a suicide kind of thing. And he went to the tree and, went into the virtual reality world. The kind of twist here is he actually had an artifact on this person that kept his body alive. So even though he went to die, he kind of had this loophole if he needed it, where his body didn't actually die, because everybody else's body would basically die within a couple weeks as the tree fed on them. So the Order of Truth, when Sir Arthur didn't return, sent a group of priests, including a very influential nobleman, after him to see what had happened to him. So they ended up going to the grove of this tree, the Dream Sallow, and they were consumed by it as well. So when the PCs arrive in Charmand and they go to the Order of Truth looking for Sir Arthur, a priest in the order tells them that he's disappeared, and they sent a group out to find him, and they haven't returned. And so he asked the PCs to go find out what's going on. And of course, they were motivated to do so because the one player character had this history with Sir Arthur, and he wanted to have a word with them. So next, they needed to get from Charmand to this town, which was on the other side of the Black Riage Mountain in the Beyonds. And so they had a cipher. I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like a teleportation thing, only it fires a laser beam and you travel along the laser beam to anywhere you can fire this laser beam to. That's where you end up. So they use that to get to the top of Mount Zanlis. And this was, I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know exactly how this was going to work. So that was a session I did completely on the fly. I have a folder of just tons and tons of crazy pictures from the internet. And I went through there real quick and I picked a few and kind of built an adventure around that. And that adventure, they were on top of the mountain and the one PC talked to machines, and he was basically contacted mentally by some presence within the mountain itself, which convinced him to investigate the innards of Mount Zanlis and basically was like kind of drawing him in. And so they went and explored the innards of the mountain, and long story short, they found a huge chamber towards the bottom of the mountain, even underneath ground level, that had a dread destroyer within it. And the dread destroyer had basically like a restraining bolt kind of device on it that kept it from accessing its more powerful weapons and kept it trapped in this chamber, so it couldn't cause any troubles. Had a lot of fun as the dread destroyer presented itself as very friendly, as this victim that had been wrongly imprisoned and was just basically asking the PCs to remove the restraining bolt. The PCs eventually realized that this machine or this creature was not on the up and up, and before freeing it, they kind of realized what was going on, and of course then the dread destroyer ceased being friendly at all. So they barely escaped that with their lives, and then returned to the top of the mountain. They had a cipher that allowed them to recharge the one that they had used, the laser beam cipher, to get to where they were. And they used that to get to the edge of the Alzarin Woods, which is a forest of purple trees. And the Alzarin Woods, like most places in the Ninth World, we're not really given anything about it other than a few little snippets. And basically we're told that it has purple trees and that there's this legend of there being poisonous fruit in it. So I kind of had to come up with stuff from there. I came up with the idea that the trees were all connected in a kind of hive mind, kind of like if you took aspen trees and combined it with like the Borg kind of idea, and that all of these purple trees were of this species that was actually collectively they were intelligent, although they didn't communicate in a way that we could understand. Had a lot of fun with that. I came up with the idea that all of the wildlife in the forest was very cruel, which one of the characters had the cruel descriptor, so he liked that. One of the characters, played by John Wright, was a plant symbiont creature, and so his plant part turned purple while he was in the woods, and basically the collective consciousness of the trees were kind of communicating with him and giving him weird dreams, and actually led to some fun things happening there. And so that was the Alzarin Woods, and then they finally made it to the town of Delirium. And, in Numenera, everything needs to have a few weird things about it. So one of the weird things about Delirium was it had this crystal arch over the town that when you went inside, there were windows that looked out on different time periods. And so this was the town where the people worshipped the Dream Sallow, and the PCs then went to the Dream Sallow, went into the virtual reality world. They found Sir Arthur there on an airship that was flying around, completely crewed by scantily clad, beautiful women. And this was basically, this reality was whatever you wanted it to be. So Sir Arthur had basically created this airship with all these beautiful women as kind of a place for him to hang out and just kind of fly around and not be bothered by people, which was the main reason that he'd come to this place in the first place, because he was sick of the Order of Truth and everybody else constantly bothering him with their endless questions and always wanting his expertise on stuff. So luckily for the PCs, he kind of started to grow a little bored with this life, and they were able to convince him to leave. And the whole reason that the Order of Truth wanted him, well, there's a lot of reasons they wanted him back, but the reason they gave the PCs, and the way that this actually ties into the overall campaign, is that the Order wanted someone to investigate the Obsidian Monolith. They reasoned that they would get as much from it, if not more, as they did from the Amber Monolith. And there's also some other reasons that they wanted in the Obsidian Monolith that I'll probably talk about next time. And so Sir Arthur was the only known person that knew how to get inside. Many people had tried to get into the Obsidian Monolith. No one had ever been able to, and it's believed that Sir Arthur knew how, and indeed he does. So he agrees to leave with the PCs, and then they want him to go with them to the Obsidian Monolith because they're worried that he's going to double cross them. But they get back to Charmand, and he tells them how to get inside, and then he escapes from them and goes who knows where. And so then that brings the PCs to traveling to the Obsidian Monolith and seeing what's inside. And I will talk about that in episode 10 of the Obsidian Monolith. All right, well, that is going to wrap up this episode of Game Master's Journey and the Obsidian Monolith. If you would like to reach me, you can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker, and you can find me on Google+. Just search for Lex Starwalker. Please visit the website at starwalkerstudios.com. There you can join our Google Plus community. You can find the show notes with helpful links. And again, I have a lot of the campaign information for the Obsidian Monolith on my blog on the website, so you can find all that there and use it in your own game. I want to send a special thank you out to some listeners that have recently given me 5-star reviews on iTunes. So thank you to Goth Pegasus, Geek Girl 748, and Everything is Geeky. Thank you very much for your reviews. I really appreciate it. And again, if you would like to support the show and help me out greatly, an excellent way to do so is to head on over to iTunes and give the show a review. I will have a link directly to where you need to go on iTunes in the show notes. And finally, another great way that you can support the show and also enjoy some great science fiction is test drive Audible books with a free trial courtesy of Game Master's Journey. You will get a 30-day free trial with one free book. I highly recommend checking out the book Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. And this is the first book of the Expanse series. It's been described by some people as Game of Thrones in space. James S.A. Corey is actually the pen name of two authors who have worked with George R.R. Martin. I think they were his assistants or something like that. But it's an excellent read. It's an excellent story. It's technically space opera, but it's much more closer to mundane science fiction than most space opera. You know, there's no time travel. There's no warp drives. It's fairly near future. Humanity has settled the solar system for the most part. You know, we've got settlements in the asteroid belt and on some of the moons of the outer planets. But there's no interstellar travel. There's no aliens, at least not yet. And it's a great story, great characters, a lot of fun, and you can get it on Audible and have someone read it to you. So you can check that out at audibletrial.com/gamemaster, or just head to the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com, and you can find the link there as well as all the small print. So once again, I want to thank you for listening to Game Master's Journey and supporting the show. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy doing this, and I'm looking forward to starting season 2 very soon, and I'm looking forward to starting the world building episodes very soon. So thank you so much again for listening. Game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.